Driverly.com, unlimited drama series.
Nothing says marital bliss like the sound of your wife giggling at her phone while you're elbow deep in 10W30 oil at 11 o'clock at night. I slid out from under my '67 Camaro SS, wiping grease off my hands with a rag that had seen better decades, and listened to Lila's laughter filtering down from our bedroom window above the garage. 22 years of marriage, and I'd never heard her laugh like that at anything I'd said. My name's Jack Morrison, and I fix things for a living. Cars, mostly, but also lawnmowers, motorcycles, and the occasional relationship between a man and his machine. What I can't fix, apparently, is whatever's broken between me and my wife. The coastal Maine town of Millbrook isn't much to look at. A collection of weathered houses clinging to rocky shores, a main street lined with shops that close by 6, and a harbor full of lobster boats and dreams that never quite made it out to sea. My garage sits right on Harbor Street, sandwiched between Murphy's Diner and a real estate office where my wife works, selling overpriced condos to city folks who think they want the simple life. I grabbed a beer from the mini fridge and settled into my desk chair, the springs creaking like old bones. Through the window, I could see the light in our bedroom, Lila's silhouette moving back and forth as she paced while talking on the phone. At this hour, it sure as hell wasn't a client calling about waterfront properties. The garage door rattled as a late October wind picked up off the water. I'd built this business from nothing. Started with a beat-up toolbox and a dream. Worked 16-hour days until I had enough saved to rent this space. Then worked harder until I could buy it outright. Now I employed 3 guys and had a waiting list of customers who trusted me with their rides. But success in a small town comes with a price. Everyone knows your business, and lately, everyone seemed to know that Jack Morrison's wife had developed expensive tastes that didn't match a mechanic's income. Lila's laughter drifted down again, followed by hushed whispers. I crept closer to the window, straining to hear. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow, Brent." Brent! I knew that name. Brent Hawthorne, local entrepreneur who drove a silver Audi and wore suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He'd moved to Millbrook 2 years ago, claiming to be an import-export, though nobody could pin down exactly what he imported or exported. My stomach dropped like a stone into dark water. I climbed the external stairs to our apartment, each step creaking under my work boots. The bedroom door was closed, but I could hear Lila's voice through the thin walls. "Jack's working late again. He never pays attention to anything but those stupid cars." I stood there like an idiot, listening to my wife plan what sounded suspiciously like a date with another man. The smart thing would have been to burst through that door and demand an explanation. Instead, I backed away, descended the stairs, and grabbed another beer. Sometimes the truth comes at you like a freight train. Other times, it seeps in slow, like oil through a cracked gasket, until one day you realize everything's been leaking for months, and you never noticed the stains. The next morning, Lila bounced into the kitchen wearing a dress I'd never seen before. Red, tight, and definitely not her usual real estate agent attire. "Morning, honey," she chirped, kissing my cheek with lips that tasted like expensive lipstick. "I'm having lunch with Jennifer today. Then we might catch a movie." Jennifer Walsh, her best friend since high school. A gossip queen who treated other people's business like her personal entertainment network. "Sounds nice," I said, not looking up from my coffee. "Which movie?" A pause. Just a heartbeat, but long enough for me to notice. "Oh, you know Jennifer. She'll want to see some romantic comedy. I'll probably fall asleep." I nodded and kissed her goodbye, tasting lies on her lips. At noon, I closed the garage and walked to Murphy's Diner. From the corner booth, I had a perfect view of the street. Sure enough, at 12:30, Lila emerged from the real estate office. But instead of heading toward the movie theater, she walked to Brent's Audi, parked discreetly behind the post office. They drove toward the Marina District, where Brent had rented one of those overpriced condos with harbor views. I followed at a distance in my pickup, feeling like a character in some bad detective movie. The Sunset Harbor complex was all glass and steel, designed to look modern and sophisticated, but mostly succeeding at looking out of place among Millbrook's weathered shingles and brick. I parked across the street and watched them disappear into the building. 3 hours later, they emerged looking satisfied and rumpled. Brent kissed my wife goodbye in broad daylight, his hands lingering on her waist like he owned her. That's when something cold and calculating settled into my chest, pushing out 22 years of trust and replacing it with something harder, something that wanted payback. I spent the rest of the afternoon planning. The beauty of being a mechanic is that you understand how things work, and more importantly, how to make them stop working. That evening, while Lila showered off the scent of her afternoon adventure, I took a walk around the neighborhood. Brent's Audi was parked outside Flanagan's pub, where he was probably bragging to his buddies about his conquest. I didn't slash his tires or key his paint job. That would have been too obvious, too juvenile. Instead, I loosened the bolts on his front wheel just enough to create a dangerous wobble, then called in an anonymous tip to the state police about a drunk driver in a silver Audi. Sometimes revenge is about patience. The next morning brought news that Brent Hawthorne had been pulled over for erratic driving, failed a sobriety test, and spent the night in jail. His car had been impounded when the police discovered the loose wheel bolts, a safety violation that suggested either mechanical incompetence or tampering. I was changing oil on Mrs. Patterson's Honda when Detective Ray Munro stopped by the garage. Ray and I went way back. We'd played high school football together before he went into law enforcement, and I went into automotive repair. Heard about Brent Hawthorne's troubles, Ray said, leaning against my workbench. Shame, I replied, not looking up from the oil filter. Guy like that should take better care of his car. Funny thing about those wheel bolts, they were loosened with a professional-grade socket wrench. Most drunk drivers don't carry those. I straightened up and met his eyes. You suggesting something, Ray? Just making conversation. You know how I like to understand how things work. Ray left without another word, but his message was clear. He knew. I knew he knew, and we both knew he couldn't prove anything. That afternoon, Lila announced she was taking a girls' weekend trip to Portland with Jennifer. She packed enough lingerie for a honeymoon and enough lies to choke a horse. You sure Jennifer's going? I asked, watching her fold a red negligee I'd never seen before. Of course. We booked adjoining rooms at the Eastland Park. She didn't meet my eyes. Sounds expensive. Jennifer's treating. Her divorce settlement came through. Another lie. Jennifer Walsh was broke, living on alimony payments that barely covered her rent. After Lila left, I made some calls. The Eastland Park had no reservation for Lila Morrison or Jennifer Walsh, but they did have a booking for Mr. and Mrs. B. Hawthorne in the penthouse suite. That's when I decided to escalate things. I drove to Portland and stationed myself in the hotel bar, nursing a whiskey and watching the elevator. At 8 o'clock, Lila and Brent emerged, dressed for dinner at one of the city's upscale restaurants. She wore the red dress from that morning weeks ago, and he had his arm around her waist like she was a prize he'd won. They never saw me follow them to DeMillo's, never noticed me at the bar while they shared lobster and champagne. But I saw everything, the way she laughed at his jokes, the way he fed her dessert, the way they couldn't keep their hands off each other. I also saw Jennifer Walsh, sitting 3 tables away with her phone out, live streaming their dinner to her Instagram followers. The caption read, "When your bestie finds her soulmate, #true love, #second chances, #living her best life." 22 years of marriage, reduced to hashtags and social media drama. I left the restaurant and walked back to the hotel, my mind churning with possibilities. In the parking garage, I found Brent's Audi. He'd gotten it out of impound and fixed the wheel bolts, but he'd parked it like an amateur, taking up 2 spaces and blocking a fire lane. I didn't touch his car this time. Instead, I did something that would hurt him more than mechanical sabotage ever could. I called the Portland police and reported a vehicle blocking emergency access in the Eastland Park garage. Then I called the hotel's management and reported guests using false names and fraudulent credit cards. Finally, I called Jennifer Walsh. Jennifer, it's Jack Morrison. I'm in Portland. And I just saw the most interesting Instagram story. Jack, oh my God, I can explain. No need to explain, but I am curious about something. How long have you been helping my wife cheat on me? Silence. Then, Jack, I never meant for it to go this far. How long, Jennifer? 6 months, maybe 7. I told her it was a mistake, But she said you two were practically divorced anyway. And Brent made her feel alive again. And you decided to document it for social media. I was drunk. I don't know what I thought. Jack, I'm so sorry. I hung up and walked back to my truck. By the time I reached Millbrook, three things had happened. Brent's car had been towed from the hotel garage. The hotel had kicked them out for using false information, and Jennifer had deleted her Instagram account. But the damage was done. In a town like Millbrook, news travels faster than gossip, and gossip travels at the speed of light. When Lila came home Sunday night, she found me waiting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee and a printed copy of Jennifer's Instagram story. We need to talk, I said. Lila stood in our kitchen doorway, still holding her weekend bag, staring at the Instagram printout like it might burst into flames. Her face went through a series of expressions: surprise, guilt, defiance, and finally, cold calculation. It's not what it looks like, she said. I almost laughed. 22 years of marriage, and she was going with the most cliché line in the cheater's handbook. Really? Because it looks like my wife spent the weekend in a hotel with another man while her best friend live-streamed their romantic dinner to half the town. She set down her bag and straightened her shoulders. Jack, our marriage has been over for years. We're like roommates. When was the last time we talked about anything besides bills and car repairs? When was the last time you tried? I've been trying. But you're always covered in grease, always working late, always choosing that garage over me. That garage pays for this house. It paid for your real estate license. It pays for those designer clothes you've been buying. Her eyes flashed. Don't you dare make this about money. Then what's it about, Lila? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you decided you wanted a richer husband and started auditioning replacements. She walked to the counter and poured herself a glass of wine, her hands remarkably steady. Brent makes me feel special. He listens to me. He takes me places and treats me like a woman, not a business partner. Brent's broke, I said quietly. She froze with the wine glass halfway to her lips. What? His import-export business. It's a shell company. He's been living on credit cards and charm. The Audi's leased, the condos rented, and his bank account's emptier than a politician's promise. You're lying. I pulled out my phone and showed her the screenshots I'd taken of public records, credit reports, and business filings. I spent today doing research instead of feeling sorry for myself. Your boyfriend's got about 6 months before his creditors catch up with him. Lila's face went pale, but she rallied quickly. Even if that's true, it doesn't change how I feel. I love him, Jack. I'm filing for divorce. Fine, I said, standing up. But you should know, I've already talked to a lawyer. That got her attention. What lawyer? Sam Brennan. Remember him? Handled your sister's divorce. He's very interested in adultery cases, especially when there's social media evidence. You bastard. I'm just protecting my interests. This house, the garage, my retirement account. I built all of that before you decided to start shopping for a replacement husband. She threw her wine glass at the wall, where it shattered and left a red stain that looked disturbingly like blood. You want to play hardball? Fine. But remember, I know where all your bodies are buried. After she stormed upstairs, I cleaned up the broken glass and wine stain, then sat at the kitchen table thinking about her parting threat. In a small town, reputation is everything, and Lila had 22 years' worth of ammunition if she wanted to destroy mine. The next morning, I opened the garage to find cheater spray-painted across the front door in red letters. Underneath, someone had added, "Ask Jack about Sarah." Sarah Hendricks. I hadn't thought about her in 15 years. My guys, Tommy, Pete, and Danny, showed up for work and pretended not to notice the graffiti while I scrubbed it off with paint thinner. But I could see the questions in their eyes. In a town like Millbrook, rumors spread faster than spilled oil. Sarah had been a customer back when I was still building the business. Her husband traveled for work, and she'd bring her car in for every little thing: oil changes, tire rotations, even just to check a noise that turned out to be nothing. She was lonely, I was working too many hours and not paying enough attention to Lila, and one thing led to another. It lasted 3 months. We ended it before anyone got hurt, and Sarah moved to Boston with her husband the following year. But in a small town, people remember everything, and Lila had obviously decided to weaponize my ancient history. By noon, I'd gotten 3 cancellations and 2 concerned phone calls from longtime customers. By closing time, the whispers had grown into full-blown gossip. Jack Morrison was a cheater who was trying to frame his innocent wife. That evening, Brent showed up at the garage. He drove up in his silver Audi like he owned the place, climbed out wearing a $1,000 suit, and walked into my shop like he was doing me a favor. Jack Morrison. His voice had that fake friendly tone that rich guys use when they're slumming with the working class. That's me. I didn't stop working on the transmission I was rebuilding. We need to talk. About what? About your wife. About this divorce. About how we can handle this situation like civilized adults. I set down my wrench and looked at him. Up close, Brent Hawthorne was smaller than he appeared from a distance, maybe 5'8", with soft hands and the kind of tan that came from a
Intimate text intro another weather yummy.
Watch more on Grammarly.com.
salon. His cologne was expensive, but it couldn't quite cover the smell of desperation. What did you have in mind? Leela's happy with me. You two have been miserable for years. Why drag this through the courts and make everyone suffer? Just give her the divorce, split things 50-50, and we can all move on with our lives. And what do I get out of this generous offer? You get to keep your reputation. Small towns love to gossip, Jack. Right now, you're the wronged husband. But if this gets ugly, if lawyers start digging into everyone's past, he shrugged. Well, I hear Sarah Hendricks was a lovely woman. The threat was clear. Play nice, or they'd destroy me with old gossip and new lies. You know what, Brent? You're absolutely right. This should be handled like civilized adults. He smiled, thinking he'd won. That's when I hit him. Not hard enough to break anything, just a solid right cross that sent him stumbling backward into a stack of tires. He went down in his expensive suit, bleeding from his nose, onto the concrete floor. What the hell? That's for threatening me in my own shop. I grabbed him by his tie and hauled him to his feet. And this is for sleeping with my wife. I didn't hit him again. Instead, I walked him to his car, opened the driver's door, and shoved him inside. Tell Lila the first said hello, I said, then slammed the door. Brent drove away, but I knew he'd be back. Men like him didn't take humiliation well, especially when it came from guys like me. I was right. 2 hours later, Detective Ray Munro showed up with a warrant and a very serious expression. Jack Morrison, you're under arrest for assault and battery. The Millbrook Police Department hadn't changed much since high school. Same beige walls, same flickering fluorescent lights, same smell of burnt coffee and broken dreams. Ray Munro processed my arrest with the efficiency of a man who'd done this too many times. But I could see the disappointment in his eyes. Assault and battery, Jack? Really? He threatened me. So you punched him in the face. Seemed like the appropriate response. Ray shook his head and locked me in the holding cell. Brent Hawthorne's pressing charges. Says you attacked him without provocation. What about the graffiti on my shop? What about him sleeping with my wife? Adultery's not a crime in Maine. Vandalism is, but you'd have to prove he did it. I spent the night in jail, staring at the ceiling and listening to the drunk tank's greatest hits. In the morning, my lawyer Sam Brennan bailed me out with a lecture about controlling my temper and a warning that Brent was pushing for maximum penalties. He wants to make an example of you, Sam said as we walked to his car. Says you're a dangerous man who can't control his violent impulses. One punch hardly makes me Mike Tyson. Tell that to the judge. Jack, this guy's got money and connections. He's hired Patricia Vance from Portland. Patricia Vance. I knew the name. She was the kind of lawyer who could make Mother Teresa look like a serial killer. We drove through downtown Millbrook, past the harbor where lobster boats bobbed at their moorings, past the tourist shops that would close for the winter in another month, past Murphy's Diner where half the town was probably discussing my arrest over coffee and gossip. There's something else, Sam said. Lila filed a restraining order. You can't go within 100 yards of her or Brent. That's my house too. Not anymore. Judge granted her temporary custody of the marital residence. I felt like I'd been sucker punched. In 24 hours, I'd lost my wife, my home, and possibly my freedom. All because I'd let my temper get the better of my judgment. Sam dropped me at the garage, where Tommy, Pete, and Danny were pretending to work while actually watching the street for signs of drama. The graffiti was gone, painted over with primer that didn't quite match the original color. Boss, Tommy said, not meeting my eyes. We got a problem. What now? 3 more customers canceled this morning. Mrs. Patterson, the Hendersons, and Bill McCarthy. Words getting around that you're, violent, unstable. I walked into my office and closed the door. Through the window, I could see the real estate office, where Lila worked. Her car parked in its usual spot like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. She'd played this perfectly, made me look like the aggressor while positioning herself as the victim. The phone rang. Jennifer Walsh. Jack! Oh my God, I heard about last night. Are you okay? Peachy, thanks for asking. I feel terrible about all this. If I hadn't posted that stupid video, you'd have found another way to screw me over. Silence. Then. I deserved that, but Jack, there's something you should know. About Brent. I'm listening. He's not just broke, he's desperate. There are rumors about gambling debts, loan sharks. Some very bad people are looking for him. How do you know this? I still have friends in Portland. The word is that Brent owes serious money to some very unserious people. The kind who break legs first and ask questions later. After I hung up, I sat in my office chair and thought about Jennifer's information. If Brent was in trouble with loan sharks, that explained his rush to marry Leela. He needed her assets to pay his debts. It also explained why he was working so hard to destroy my reputation. If I looked like an unstable, violent man, Leela would be more likely to divorce me quickly and give him access to half of everything I'd built. But two could play the information game. I called my old friend Mike Sullivan, who ran a security company in Portland. Big Mike and I had served together in the Army before he went into private security, and I went into automotive repair. Jackie boy, Mike's voice boomed through the phone. Heard you've been making headlines. Bad news travels fast. Want to tell me your side? I gave him the whole story. Leela's affair, Brent's threats, my moment of stupidity with the punch. Mike listened without interruption, then whistled softly. You stepped in at this time, brother. But maybe I can help. This Brent character, I've heard his name before. Give me 24 hours. That evening, I checked into the Millbrook Inn, a bed and breakfast that had seen better decades. My room smelled like mothballs and disappointment, but it had a view of the harbor and was exactly 101 yards from my house. Through the window I could see lights on in what used to be our bedroom. Leela's silhouette moved back and forth behind the curtains, and I wondered if she was packing her things or just pacing while she planned her next move. At midnight, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Stop digging or you'll regret it. I screenshot the message and forwarded it to Ray Monroe with a note. Guess who's making threats now? The next morning brought news that changed everything. Mike Sullivan called at 7 a.m., his voice grim. Jack, you need to hear this. Your boy Brent isn't just in debt, he's running a con. The import-export business is fake, but he's been using it to launder money for some very bad people. The feds are building a case. How long before they move? Could be weeks, could be months. But when they do, anyone connected to him is going down too, including your wife, if she's not careful. I hung up and stared out at the harbor, watching the morning fog roll in from the Atlantic. Lila thought she was trading up from a small-town mechanic to a sophisticated businessman. Instead, she'd hooked herself to a sinking ship. The question was, did I throw her a life preserver or let her go down with the boat? My phone rang again. This time it was Lila. Jack, we need to talk. Her voice was shaky, scared. Whatever confidence she'd had yesterday was gone. I thought you had a restraining order against me. I'm lifting it. Can you meet me at Murphy's Diner in an hour? Why the change of heart? Because, she said, and I could hear tears in her voice. I think I've made a terrible mistake. Murphy's Diner at 8 in the morning was neutral territory, too public for a scene, too familiar for pretense. I took a corner booth where I could watch the door and ordered black coffee from Doris Murphy, who'd been serving breakfast to half the town since before I was born. Leela arrived 10 minutes late, wearing jeans and a sweater instead of her usual business attire. Without makeup, she looked older, more fragile. The woman who'd thrown a wine glass at our kitchen wall had been replaced by someone who looked genuinely frightened. She slid into the booth across from me, ordered coffee, and stared at her hands for a long moment. I got a visit from some men yesterday, she said finally. What kind of men? The kind who don't make appointments. They were asking about Brent, about his business, about our relationship. She looked up, and I saw fear in her eyes. Jack, they knew things. About the hotel in Portland. About the money Brent's been spending. About the engagement ring he bought me. Engagement ring? He proposed last week. Said as soon as the divorce was final, we'd get married and move to Florida. Start fresh. She laughed bitterly. Turns out the ring was bought with a credit card that's already maxed out, and the fresh start was really a fresh escape. Doris brought Lila's coffee and retreated to give us privacy. The diner was filling up with the usual morning crowd. Fishermen grabbing breakfast before heading out, shop owners preparing for another day of small-town commerce, retirees stretching their coffee and gossip until lunch. What did these men want? Information about Brent's assets. They seemed to think I might know where he's hiding money. She wrapped her hands around her coffee mug like it was an anchor. Jack, I think he's been using me. The house, my savings account, even my real estate license. He's been planning to use all of it to disappear. And you're just figuring this out now. I was stupid. I was lonely and flattered and stupid. Tears started down her cheeks. When you hit him, when you got arrested, I thought you were just being jealous and possessive. But then he started talking about liquidating assets quickly, about how we needed to move fast before you could tie things up in court. I sipped my coffee and watched my wife of 22 years fall apart across from me. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to tell her everything would be okay. But a larger part remembered the graffiti on my shop, the canceled customers, the night in jail. What do you want from me, Lila? I want to call off the divorce. I want to drop the charges against you. I want to fix this mess before it destroys both of us. And Brent, I broke up with him yesterday. Told him I was going back to you. She wiped her eyes with a napkin. He didn't take it well. Define didn't take it well. He said I was making a mistake, that you'd never forgive me, never trust me again, that I was choosing a grease monkey over a man who could give me the world. He's not wrong about the trust part. I know I destroyed something that can't be fixed. But Jack, we have history together. We built a life together. That has to count for something. Before I could answer, the diner door opened and Brent Hawthorne walked in. He was wearing the same expensive suit as the day before, but it was wrinkled now, and his left eye was purple where I'd hit him. He scanned the room, spotted us in the corner booth, and walked over with the swagger of a man who thought he still held all the cards. Well, isn't this cozy, he said, sliding into the booth next to Lila without being invited. The happy couple, reunited at last. Leave, Brent, Lila said quietly. I don't think so. We have unfinished business. He looked at me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Jack, I hear you've been asking questions about my finances. That's not very neighborly, just protecting my interests. Your interests? Lila's with me now. Has been for months. You're yesterday's news, old man. Actually, Lila said, straightening in her seat, I told you yesterday that we're finished. I meant it. Brent's smile faltered. You're making a mistake, sweetheart. This loser can't give you what I can. What can you give me, Brent? Debt? Federal charges? Visits from loan sharks? Now the smile disappeared completely. You don't know what you're talking about. I know enough. Lila stood up, her fear replaced by anger. I know your import-export business is fake. I know you owe money to dangerous people. I know you were planning to use my assets to pay your debts and then disappear. Prove it. That's when Detective Ray Munro walked into the diner, followed by two men in dark suits who had federal agent written all over them. Brent Hawthorne? Ray said. These gentlemen would like a word with you. The color drained from Brent's face. I want a lawyer. That's your right, one of the federal agents said. But first, we have some questions about your business activities, your banking records, and your association with certain individuals in Boston and New York. They escorted Brent out of the diner in handcuffs, while half of Millbrook watched through the windows. The great romance that had destroyed my marriage was ending not with passion or drama, but with federal charges and perp walks. Lila sat back down, shaking. How did you know? I didn't, but I have friends who know how to ask the right questions. The charges against you will be dropped now that your boyfriend's been arrested for money laundering and racketeering. We sat in silence for a few minutes, watching the federal agents load Brent into an unmarked sedan. Outside, the morning fog was lifting off the harbor, revealing a clear October sky. What happens now? Lila asked. I finished my coffee and left money on the table. Now you call Sam Brennan and make sure you're not legally connected to any of Brent's business dealings. Then you figure out how to rebuild your reputation in a town where everyone knows you cheated on your husband with a criminal. And us? I stood up and looked down at the woman I'd married 22 years ago. The woman who'd thrown away our marriage for a con man in an expensive suit. There is no us, Lila. You made sure of that. I walked out of Murphy's diner and drove to my garage, where Tommy, Pete, and Danny were waiting with grins and fresh coffee. Boss, Tommy said. Heard the news about your wife's boyfriend. Federal charges, huh? So they say. Guess that makes you look pretty smart, figuring out he was a crook. Just lucky, I guess. But it wasn't luck. It was patience, planning, and the willingness to let my enemies destroy themselves while I watched from a safe distance. Sometimes the best revenge is just giving people enough rope to hang themselves. 6 months later, Brent Hawthorne was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Lila moved to Portland, where she started over with a new real estate agency and a lot of hard-learned lessons about trusting smooth-talking strangers. I kept the house, the garage, and my reputation as the mechanic who'd seen through a con man when everyone else was fooled by his expensive clothes and fake charm. And every morning when I opened the garage and looked out at the harbor, I remembered that sometimes the best way to fix something broken is to let it stay broken and build something better in its place.